All right, I'll ask our members to take their seats. We'll start in just a moment. All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting for February 11th, 2020. I'd like to call the members to order. And I want to mention we are 1 week away from Heritage Week, which is next week, all next week, and we have Heritage Day here at City Hall on Tuesday, February the 18th. The theme this year is 2020 Vision, bringing the past into the future. And from 11:30 a.m. to 2 o'clock p.m. at City Hall, there's about 40 exhibitors who are going to be down in the main plaza. And right at the start at 11:30, there's going to be a special proclamation for the Diefenbunker. So encourage everyone to come out to City Hall next Tuesday. Are there any declarations of interest today? Member Podolsky.
Yes, on the application for alteration of 41 and 41.5, 35, 37 William Street, we were the architects that were retained immediately after the fire and spent about 5 months to do the analysis and do the preliminary design. So I'm declaring interest on this file. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other declarations? Not today. All right. We have two items. Well, actually, we have the minutes to do first. Are the minutes for the meeting of January 14th, 2020 confirmed? Confirmed. Thank you. And we have two items today. We have a presentation from staff on both of them. We have designation of Hydro Ottawa substations, and we have the William Street properties. I want to remind, if there's anyone from the public who wishes to speak today as a delegation, there's a sign-up sheet at the front of the room, and you can do so there. So the first item is designation of Hydro Ottawa substations under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And we have Anne Fitzpatrick with our presentation today. Anne.
Is okay? Okay, sorry. Good morning. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. In front of you today is a report recommending the designation of 5 hydro substations under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The properties are located at 247 Glebe Avenue, 340 Holland Avenue, 1275 Carling Avenue, 351 King Edward Avenue, and 39 Riverdale Avenue. They're up on the screen, the photos of the building. Here's a location map showing the 5 properties. The Carling Avenue building is the furthest west, and King Edward is at the top of the map, up in the northeast. The buildings are all active hydro substations whose role is to reduce the voltage carried in transmission lines to levels appropriate for distribution for use throughout the city. The buildings are owned by Hydro Ottawa. Hydro Ottawa supports the designation subject to the understanding that in an emergency situation, the designation will not prevent alterations or demolitions to ensure the provision of electrical services can resume or be continued, and city staff agree with this provision. Heritage staff have worked with Hydro Ottawa on the designation, and James McRae, partner at Verterra Corp, who represents Hydro Ottawa, is here today. In terms of policy framework, the official plan states that individual buildings will be designated as properties of cultural heritage value, and the provincial policy statement states significant built heritage resources shall be conserved. According to the Ontario Heritage Act, a property must meet Regulation 0906, which requires a property to have either design, historical, or contextual value. The buildings in front of you today meet all 3, and I'll walk you through that evaluation and research now. So the buildings all have design value as excellent examples of industrial buildings that are influenced by a range of architectural styles. This is Hydro Substation number 2, constructed in 1922, influenced by Edwardian classicism. You can see the brick pilasters, stepped parapet, stone keystones. 340 Holland Avenue was constructed in modern classical style, features simple brick pilasters, stone door surrounds, brick corbelling. Substation number 3 was constructed in 1929, a variation of the classical style, and you can see the architecture reflects the prestige of the expansion of the electrical network at the time. 351 King Edward, substation number 4 was built in 1931, features decorative metal work. a metal entrance canopy, and a stone string course. Finally, 39 Riverdale Avenue, which is notably different in style. It was constructed in 1946, about 15 years after the building we just saw on King Edward Avenue. It's influenced by the Art Deco style, as evident in its symmetrical design, smooth stone cladding, and lack of ornamental details. Individually, the buildings are all excellent examples of architectural styles, and together they show the evolution of style that was taking place. The building here is the last substation to be built in a bold and decorative style. This is just a detail showing some of the architectural detailing of the buildings. You can see stone panel with the building's name, metal entrance canopy suspended by chain, copper detailing, and some large industrial metal windows, which are really beautiful. Historical value, the three buildings at the top, Glebe, King Edward, and Carling Avenue, were all constructed by local architect William C. Beatty, who also designed the buildings at the bottom, the Ottawa Hydro office at 109 Bank Street, the Ottawa Public School Board office at 330 Gilmore, and the York Street Public School. The building at 340 Holland was designed by D.J. Spence, a Montreal architect. Some examples of his work are a post office here in Montreal, and the Insurance Exchange building. 39 Riverdale was designed by J. Albert Ewart, another prominent Ottawa architect, who also designed Southminster Church and the Ottawa Civic Hospital. Just take a tea before this is a longer presentation. So the history also, the other historical value is associated with the Ottawa Hydroelectric Commission. Electric lighting came to Ottawa around 1882 when 2 carbon lamps were erected in the lumber yards of LeBreton Flats. The electricity business was lucrative, and several companies were quickly established by the business and political elites in the city. Any smaller companies were subsumed by the larger ones, and eventually the Ottawa Electric Company, headed by Thomas Aaron, became the primary supplier with a monopoly on providing power to the city. The mayor at the time, James Ellis, who's up on the screen at the left, fought against the monopoly, and in 1905, frustrated with the lack of competition and the resulting high rates, City Council held a special council meeting to buy out the Consumer Electric Company, which included 1 small substation and a distribution system. The plant came under the control of City Council and was known as the Municipal Electric Department. Just like that, the city was in the electrical business. The result of the city joining the electricity business was an immediate drop in rates. In 1905, the rate was 12 cents a kilowatt hour, and by 1914, the rate dropped to 0.025 cents. In 1916, the Municipal Electric Department became the Ottawa Hydroelectric Commission, which ran its own distribution system, selling power it bought from the province of Ontario. Another chart, which is rare in heritage presentations, the demand for electricity skyrocketed, and the Hydro Commission undertook an ambitious program that resulted in the construction of the substations in front of you today. In 1905, there were just over 1,000 customers, and by 1941, there were over 16,000. And you can see some of the headlines from the newspaper about the growth of the company. Finally, in 1950, after 42 years of being in direct competition for the role of primary power supplier, the city purchased the Ottawa Light, Heat and Power Company, and then later, through amalgamation in 2000, Hydro Ottawa, Gloucester Hydro, Goulburn Hydro, Canada Hydro, Nepean Hydro, and Ottawa Hydro came together to create Hydro Ottawa that would serve the entire urban population of Ottawa. There's one building here that has a slightly different story. It's not a numbered substation, as you may have noticed. It was constructed as a substation for the Ottawa Electric Railway, a streetcar public transit system in the city of Ottawa that operated from 1891 and 1959. The city purchased the Ottawa Electric Railway in 1948. The Ottawa Electric Company began to operate this substation in 1944, and it was eventually taken over by Ottawa Hydro in 1950. The buildings are also representative of the growth of Ottawa in the early to mid-20th century. Here, the locations of the buildings have been overlaid on a map from 1928. The Glebe substation, which is number 1, sort of located right in the center of the map, was referred to as the West End substation when it was constructed because it was the first to be built outside of the core. Just to zoom in to show you, on the left are the Holland and Carling Avenue substations. You can see the farmer fields and the lack of development surrounding it. Number 5 shows where 39 Riverdale Avenue would be constructed, and you can see Ottawa South, Ottawa East have yet to be fully developed. Last but not least is contextual value. Here we have some historic photos. Sorry, the one at the top is out of order, but the one at the bottom is not. The substations contribute to the understanding of a community and are functionally linked to their surroundings as hydro substations that have remained in use since their construction. So 1931 was when the King Edward Station opened. You can see the horses and carriages there, to cars, to the trucks we see today. The buildings are landmarks in their neighborhoods because of the large size and distinctive architectural expression. The landmark status is emphasized by their location primarily in residential neighborhoods or along busy arterial roads. In terms of consultation, Councillor Leeper, Menard, and Fleury are aware of the proposed designation. The community associations were notified of the proposed designation, and I believe the Glebe Community Association provided comments. Heritage Ottawa was notified and has submitted comments that were included in the report as well. And finally, the recommendation, the substation meet the criteria for designation under the Ontario Heritage Act, and staff recommend that BHSC recommend that Council issue a notice of intent to designate the properties under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. We don't have any speakers registered for this item, but we do have correspondence on file from the Glebe Community Association and Heritage Ottawa, both in support of the designation. So we can go straight to questions from committee members, if any committee members wanted to ask questions to staff. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Certainly have seen these buildings over the years in my travels and never really thought too much about the history, so I appreciate that context. I think we're prepared to support this, but I just wanted to know, have you had conversations with Ottawa Hydro, and what has their reaction been?
Yes, we've been working with Hydro Ottawa that in the result of an emergency situation as defined by Hydro Ottawa, the designation would not limit their ability to get electrical services back up and running.
Yes, Member Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to take this opportunity to congratulate the staff on not just this excellent presentation and the amount of research in the document that was provided to us, which is rock solid, but also that, you know, all the hard work that's gone into the work with Hydro Ottawa to have these important properties designated. I certainly am very familiar with them as well, and as a student of history, I actually did my own little research paper many moons ago, so I was particularly excited to see this coming forward, but I do want to take the opportunity to congratulate you on great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I did have a question, kind of a follow-up to Councillor Brockington, and you mentioned, Anne, about in an emergency situation that Hydro Ottawa would be able to perform any repairs required to ensure the continuing delivery of electricity. What would be the process after that? So say they had to take down a wall or something to repair the electrical equipment, would they still have to come back through as any other property owner would do if they wanted to repair it or make changes and repairs to it? How would that work procedurally?
Yeah, so following an emergency situation, once the building's been stabilized and the services are back up and running, the owner, and this is across the board, a property owner would apply to the city for permits for if it was shoring or reconstruction of the wall, but staff have the ability to process that permit under delegated authority, so it could be done much quicker than the normal permit process. So we would review those permits under the delegated authority process.
Okay, thank you. I see Mr. Markuson, okay. Any other questions from, okay, Member Podolsky.
Yes, question is, does the designation also include the outdoor power elements? Because I just wanted to know whether that was considered to be part of the designation itself.
Yes, thanks. It's a good question. I just put up an extra slide I had on screen here. So the designation itself is technically tied to a property because that's what the Ontario Heritage Act allows us to do. But in the statement of significance, you'll notice that the designation itself and the heritage attributes we've identified are specifically limited to the exterior of the building. So the accessory buildings or any of the infrastructure associated with hydro is not included as part of the designation.
Okay, thank you very much. And like Caroline, I'd like to compliment the staff for all the work on this. These are landmarks that we often overlook, but as an architect, I've always been partial to them and love them a lot, and hope that Ottawa Hydro continues.
Questions or comments from our members? All right, well, thanks to staff for this. Thank you also to Hydro Ottawa for their cooperation and collaboration with staff, and I think these are functional yet beautiful buildings, and I'm glad that we're able to recommend, well, hoping that our committee will recommend designation today, and they continue to enhance the community many decades after they were originally built. Are the report recommendations carried? Carried. Thank you. So this report goes to Council on February 26th. Our second item is an application to alter two heritage properties, 35 and 37 William Street and 41 and 41.5 William Street. These are designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. And these applications to alter are according to plans by KWC Architects received in December 2019. We have a few people signed up as delegations. If anyone is wishing to speak and hasn't signed up yet, you can do so now at the front. And we have a presentation, an overview on the alterations from Sally Coots from our Heritage Group at the City. Sally, good morning.
This application is in front of you today for new construction in the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. The properties, there are two separate properties, or there's 4 addresses, 2 property owners. One property's owned is 3537 William Street, and the other one is 41.5 William Street. These are being bundled into a single report because they were all affected by a fire in April 19. So, 2019. This is the location map. It shows the William Street, and it is characterized by narrow 19th and 20th century storefronts that are all closely clustered together in a dense urban form. This has always been a retail street. There were hotels and commercial buildings on it since the mid-19th century. The stone building, I'll get into that later. So these applications are to permit the rebuilding and enlargement of the properties following the fire. This is the street prior to the fire. As you can see, as I mentioned, the small buildings on small lots with retail storefronts at grade and rental space above. Sometimes this was actual apartments, and other times it was commercial use throughout the long history of the street. One of the things about William Street is how much it evolved in different landowners, etc., over the years, but it has always been very important at a street at the heart of the Byward Market that really defines some of its character. Again, before the fire. So the fire of April 2019, you'll probably recall, was devastating. One of the first things that the Heritage Section did after the fire was to work closely with the property owners to save the front facades of the building. So we had very cooperative and enthusiastic property owners who were interested in getting the street and their businesses going again. It is a long process, I will admit, but again, we issued a number of permits through delegated authority, which the emergency situation allowed us to do, and these permits included shoring up the buildings immediately after the fire, allowing the demolition of damaged parts of the structure, the removal of the roofs, etc. The complete removal of the front facade of 41 William to be able to clear the site more efficiently, and underpinning the foundations in preparation for the project that involves retaining the facades and building behind. So here is current conditions. This is just last week. You can see that the buildings are now shored up. The sidewalk is open. It didn't stay closed for very long, so there was efforts of everyone to keep this important street of Byward Market vibrant. And so here is also taken last week, and you'll notice, you can see the gap where the building was removed to allow for clearing the site. So the properties are designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. And that is why in Part 5, the Byward Market Heritage District, which was created in 1990, it was the province's first commercial heritage conservation district. And because applications to alter are required, this is in front of you today. Part of our discussions during the time when we were also working very closely with property owners to make sure that the integrity of the structures, et cetera, was maintained, was to discuss, there was early in the process a question about whether or not this was an opportunity to alter and add to 3537 William Street. And this was brought forward by the property owner, who was interested in the construction of a small apartment building that would be tied in to his restaurant business at the front. So, as part of our analysis of this request for additional stories, and prior to our decision about whether or not it was supportable, Heritage staff thought that the best thing to do would be to do some view analysis. And so we drew up a map with arrows on it and key views throughout from vantage points near William Street to determine the impact of potential 2 stories to the rear of the building at 3537 William Street. The firm of Barry Podolsky Architects undertook this analysis as the conservation architect who was dealing with rebuilding the buildings, although, as you know from your applications today, the final application is from KWC Architects, but this was the conservation portion. So I would ask you to ignore in these pictures the actual design of the building, but look at the massing of the buildings. So as you can see, this was one of the views that we requested. Again, key points where a pedestrian would be moving throughout the market. So our conclusion is that the visual impact of an additional 2 stories did not adversely affect the fine-grained quality of William Street in this location. The importance of the small storefronts that I've mentioned, et cetera, they were still very much in evidence and not overwhelmed by an additional 2 stories. This is the rear of the property. Again, in having the front, the 2 extra stories set back from the William Street facade, that does move the impact onto the rear of the property. But as you can see here, it's the very mixed character. You have the rear of buildings on York Street, and then you have the Rogers Trucks parking and a more recent hotel to the east. So we thought that the impact on this facade was appropriate. Again, this is a view that only a bird will see. However, it does serve to show the footprint of the 35-37 addition. Plus, you will also note to the south, there's a half-story addition. It's an addition of a mezzanine to 41 and a half, which is intended to just give some additional headspace downstairs in the actual building and increase the utility of the second floor there. So it is a complex site, as you can see from here. So I've included, before we start, do I get a, no, oh, no, I never do. You can see on the left is the site plan for 3537 William Street. It's an L-shaped building. You can see the outline of the third floor and the fourth floor to see that there is a step back from the front facade and a further step back again for the fourth floor. And an L-shaped building. And this also clearly shows the access to the apartment buildings is from York Street down a secure lane, which will be lockable. So that's how it will interact with that large parking lot that you saw in our last slide. And then 41 and a half William Street is a very much simpler building, which with the characteristic rectangular form of buildings that face William Street and the small mezzanine that I discussed in the previous slide. So the proposal for 3537 William Street involves 2 new storefronts, the replacement of cornices, and the addition that rises 2 stories, as I said, above the former roof to the rear. The addition will contain apartments. The third story is set back about 5 meters from the front facade, and the fourth a further 1.5 meters. The architect is also here today. He can, if I've gotten anything wrong. In this image, you see the third floor balcony right above the cornice, and we have asked the architect to set this back a little further for the final design, and he has agreed to do so. So the terrace on the rooftop of the historic building, which is a new rooftop, but will be set back a bit to minimize the impact of that glass balcony, and that can be undertaken through minor design changes approved by the general manager. In addition, we've asked the portion of the building that you see that's a blank wall with an 8 on it. The 8 explains the building material. We've asked for some visual relief for that, some kind of a pattern and the architect has also agreed to do that, and we can approve that again through minor design changes. The new part of the building will feature glass and solid curtain walls with rectangular metal screens that sit proud of the actual walls. The screen's color is inspired by the historic stone of 35 William Street, which was actually, it's a very interesting building. It was constructed before 1878 as a side gable street, and at some point, probably due to a fire, it got a flat, it was side gable to, it was a side gable building, so not a front gable. So the slope sloped away from William Street. At some point in the history of the building, that roof was remained, and it got its flat roof form that it has today. 37 William Street has recently been painted gray, and that paint will be removed to its original color, partly because part of the interest of the street is these very small storefronts that change color and form, and you can clearly see the lines between them, and that's something that we really wanted to reinforce as this project went forward. There is also, in addition to the heritage permit today, for 3537 William Street, site plan approval and minor rezoning is required. So as I said, the main entrance to the apartment building is from York Street through a secure gate. Stone from the original building that was saved after the fire will be reused at the entrance. And again, in this instance, we've also asked for some relief on the large east-facing wall. There was some interest, and this will be subject to the function of the ground floor restaurant, of whether or not a line of kind of high clerestory type windows could be installed, but that depends on the layout of the kitchen. So we're holding that as a possibility, but we don't know yet whether that can happen. And again, all of these changes will be approved through delegated authority for minor design changes. One of the things that I should add, if you, again, and this is the south facade facing, again, with larger windows and the same kind of patterns of metal screens and the fenestration of rectangular windows that echo the character of the market are repeated here. Here, this is a very interesting picture because or elevation, because it helps show the setbacks. And one of the things that we did when we were trying to determine an appropriate line for the third floor to start at, we looked back at, and I can go back there, sorry to be repetitive, but we looked at the site plan, and the line where this starts is consistent with a line from the reflects the massing of the fish market building that faces York Street. So you can see there's a 2-story portion here, and then it rises to 3 facing York Street, and that was the line that we chose, we thought was the most appropriate for the 3rd and 4th story to rise. Sorry to have to go back. So 4148 1.5 William Street is a different property owner. Again, one of the storefronts was removed through delegated authority, which permits us in emergency situations to issue permits without having to come to Built Heritage Subcommittee and for a permit under the Heritage Act. So that is being rebuilt, and then the mezzanine that is less than a story is being constructed. There's the property owner has already received minor variances to allow this to proceed. And I think that you probably noted when reading the reports that the architect for both the property owners is the same. So I think this really added to the project because it allowed the buildings are very, very different, but they've been related because of their tightness throughout time. And so I think that having the same person work on them really helped us to understand the street and the importance of retaining some of the characteristic streetscape elements of the street, including, you'll note that the storefronts are all brand new, but we were very interested in retaining the large bulkhead at the bottom, which is characteristic of commercial buildings in the Byward Market, and the recessed doorways. So there's no the flat look that you find with later retail is not here. The recesses of the doorways, which was so important in the 19th century to light commercial spaces, is repeated here because that's a very important part of the character of the commercial streets in the Byward Market. In terms of consultation, Heritage Ottawa was notified of the application, and I think that you received their comments yesterday. Neighbors within 30 meters of the property were notified. We have received no comments back. The Lower Town Community Association was also notified of the application in early January. We received no comments, and we met with the ward councillor who, as you will see in your report, supports the application. He did have some questions about issues I've talked about with the relief of those large blank walls, and the windows at grade in the back of the building were his idea, and we discussed that with the architect present and the councillor, so it was a very fruitful conversation. So the recommendations are that City Council, that you approve the applications in front of you today, that you delegate authority for minor design changes, and you issue the heritage permit. I'm just going to go back a little bit, or back to this photo and go through a little bit of, I've described the buildings, and now I'm going to describe why they, sorry, it's kind of not out of order, but so why I say the recommendation is to approve. How did we reach that conclusion? Again, we analyzed the application using the Byward Market Heritage District guidelines. As I mentioned, these were approved in 1990, so they are clearly pre-2005 guidelines, but they're still very useful, and we use them for every application in the Byward Market. The study, the guidelines had a few general principles, including that the preservation of modest buildings is as important as the preservation of monumental ones, that new construction should be of its own time and be designed in what was referred to as a contemporary vernacular. The guidelines also encourage the retention of small lot development. As you can see, we did this, the applicant did that here. Consistent setbacks, again, these are all on the front lot line. Traditional storefronts with recessed entries, the use of larger windows at grade with smaller ones above to retain the pattern of retail at grade. This project does all of these things. And also the project speaks to height in the Byward Market and talks about new buildings respecting the character, et cetera, of the heights in the neighborhood. Again, with the elaborate, or with the detailed view analysis, we thought that this accomplished that. Respecting height does not mean replicating them. It means being respectful of the character of the building, of the street as established through its street faces and ongoing character. Again, and also the 1990 study was undertaken by Julian Smith, who we all know is a very highly respected conservation architect, and he was very consistent in his analysis, saying that the Byward Market has changed extensively throughout its history from when it was first established in the early in the mid-19th century. Until now, and that sort of that pattern of change is part of its heritage character, and that it's not an area that should be frozen in time, but continue to evolve, reflecting the commercial and market needs of the city. So so that analysis again led us to conclude and make our recommendations, which are in front of you today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sally. We do have several delegations. Before we go to delegations, though, Member Housel has a motion that she would like to introduce. So we'll introduce that motion, and then we do have copies of it that we can circulate to anyone who needs them. Member Housel.
It is, there's a lot of detail in this, so I'm going to summarize to keep things moving quickly. But whereas 3537 William Street and 41 and 41.5 William Street are designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, are identified as Category 2 buildings within the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District and face directly onto the Central Market Building. Whereas William Street in this location features a series of two-story flat-roofed commercial buildings, and that numbers 35 and 37 represent a significant heritage component of one of the most important commercial rows defining the market core. Whereas the identified properties are subject to the heritage overlay, which requires that development maintain the same character, scale, massing, volume, floor area, and footprint of the existing building. Whereas the application's benefits to heritage conservation and housing creation may be similarly achieved with a reduction in height to better complement the Byward Market's unique heritage landscape. And whereas the design at the present height is visually incompatible with the historic integrity of William Street, a significant heritage component of one of the most important commercial rows in the city. Therefore, be it resolved that the Built Heritage Subcommittee amend the report recommendation 1 as follows. Approve the application to alter 35 to 37 William Street, a property located in the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District, according to plans submitted by KWC Architects, received on December 19th, 2019, see elevations, document 7, and renderings, document 8, on the condition that the proposed development is limited in height to one additional floor as described by the submitted plans for a total of 3 floors in height.
Okay, thank you, Member Halso. So essentially, your motion seeks to limit to 1 additional floor rather than 2 additional floors, which is what the report is recommending. I will give staff a chance to respond to that, but I want to go to the delegations first. Dominic Santaguida, we have first. We have Andrew Glass. We have Maurizio Marta Guago and Colleen Ivets. Mr. Santaguida. Okay. Absolutely, absolutely. Would anyone like to, so Member House has introduced a motion looking to limit the number of stories. Would anyone like to address that in particular or any other aspects of the report?
Hi, I'm Maurizio Martinegel with KWC Architects. I just thought I'd sign up to see if anyone has any questions or clarifications or anything like that on.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. I have questions about, first of all, 35 and 30, am I on? Yes, 35 and 37. Just looking at some of the renderings that are before us, some inconsistencies, perception-wise, I think. One is the, I guess it's the stairwell pavilion on the roof.
Yes.
One of the images
Member
that...
Quinn, could you refer to which, I have the report in front of me, this would help if you could.
I think it was, oh, hello. Yeah, there it is.
Oh, okay.
So I'm looking at this image here, and I'm seeing the penthouse related to the stairwell, or to the elevator, I think, at the back there, popping
Yes,
up.
that's an elevator penthouse.
But the larger...
It's the extension. It's about a five foot above the roof level.
Yeah.
That's just what elevators need.
But the larger one, which is the stair penthouse, doesn't appear there, or whereas on page, I have the page 25 of the staff report does show the, I guess this is the north elevation. You do see it there.
Yes, there's a stairwell that comes up from the 4th
Yeah.
floor to the roof for servicing.
And that looks higher than the elevator penthouse.
Yes, we need again, the elevator overrun needs approximately 5 feet for its overrun, but for the stair, we require at least 8 feet.
8 feet, but it doesn't appear here.
This was a view previously done by Barry Podolsky at the outset of the project.
Right? So I'm just wondering, the other views that we're looking at today, will that be visible on some of these view planes?
I guess if you go to page 29, there's a rendering there.
Yeah.
Do you have that rendering?
No. Or even the one that shows the people on the balcony, on the terrace, there was one that had a little... Well, you can see it there, but, and there is 8,
Yes,
the front 8.
that's the stair, yes.
And so it's very, in these renderings, it's almost a ghost-like structure, but it is nonetheless going to have quite a presence. And I'm just wondering about
Yes,
materials and the visibility. It's been downplayed, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, in the
Yes,
renderings
I mean, the effort
we've
is to
seen.
downplay it and to use a color that's different than the rest of the composition, just to limit its impact.
Right.
Yeah.
And then also from the east side, just looking at, when you're approaching, when you're coming into the Byward Market along York, heading east, or I'm sorry, heading west, that elevation is going to be quite visible. And the rendering, I don't know if you've thought more information about some of the materials and what that it's very stark right now, so at least how it appears, you know, I mean, I'm just,
Yeah,
I don't have a
mean,
lot to go on.
the material itself is it's kind of a stone product. So it's rich in its texture as an actual material. It's a man-made product, but it's a compressed kind of stone. There's no resins in it, but it's not plain like metal siding. It has a bit of a texture.
Okay. And my other question.
Oh, sorry, and the overrun, the elevator,
That's actually the stair.
The-
You don't see the elevator overrun in this view from this vantage point, but you can see the stair.
And then I had another question about 41 and 41 and a half pertaining to the mezzanine. Again, there are a couple of, one of the images makes it appear, yeah, so is that, is that in the same height as the first story of the addition to 35, 37? It appears to be from that.
It's similar, just, yeah, it meets up with the ceiling of the second floor.
Okay. Is that ever going to have access? Is this like a future rooftop garden here, or a rooftop cafe?
Not that I am aware of.
Would the structure allow for that?
Not at the moment.
Yeah, because in this rendering, it looks considerably shorter than,
Yes.
than its neighbor, so there's a little confusion there.
its height is included, above the roof is included in the report.
A question, is the zoning amendment pertaining for 35, 37 dealing with the height restriction? The need to change the height for the area?
The minor rezoning is addressing the additional height.
Right, and so it doesn't apply to 41, 41 and a half? Because I see that does surpass
No,
the...
because 41 and a 41 and a half is considerably smaller, and it doesn't involve an additional use. It has already been approved by the
variance?
Committee of Adjustment
Yeah.
for that, and the approval was relief from the provisions of the heritage overlay to allow an extension of X meters above the former roof line.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Member Quinn. Any other questions for our delegation for the applicant? Councillor Brockington.
I'm just wondering, because I think it would be useful before we dismiss the delegate to have staff first comment on the motion, because that might provide additional questions. So that the motion is capping the height to one additional story, which is in conflict with what's being proposed. Can we have your comment, please?
Heritage staff, as a group, looked very closely at this project when the applicant or when the property owner of 3537 asked if we would consider additional height, and that is the reason that we did those view studies. That was to inform our decisions. It wasn't to confirm our suspicions. It was before we had formed an opinion, and because of the size of the setback from the William Street facade, which allows the buildings very much to be read on their own, and the additional step back of the fourth story, the light color of the cladding, so that it is compatible with but different from the tone of the stone building, because of the glass balconies, etc., and the fact that, as you see in the picture on the screen, is that to the east there is the hotel, which is very much a 1960s building. That the conflict there would be, it wouldn't be a conflict there because of the later character of the area. And again, the view analysis showed to us that this wasn't an adverse impact on the heritage character of the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. It was consistent with the Byward Market guidelines that speak to of evolution and a range of heights. It the effort taken and willingly embraced by through dialogue, this has been one of the most iterative design processes I've participated in quite a long time. So through all of that process and fine-tuning the storefronts and rebuilding the cornice and asking for things like, you know, some visual relief on the facades that are blank, all of that led us to the conclusion that 4 stories was appropriate at this site, and that it would make a positive contribution to the William Street facade, but also increase residential housing in the Byward Market. So, you know, accomplishing 2 very worthy goals.
Okay, so thank you for that information. I appreciate that, and that has answered a number of questions for me. So with respect to the delegate, the architect, I do not have any questions.
Member Halsall.
I do have a question for the architect. It's more of a background or an origin story question. How was the 4-story height determined, or how did that come about? Is there a need on the part of the owner? Why not 5 or 3?
I think at the outset of the project, when we took it over, and I do want to acknowledge Barry Podolsky's start with this project, we received it as a 4-story project, and I understood there was a process that had taken place with the Heritage, Sally, and understanding what can be done here. So I think that's how we arrived at 4 stories.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for the applicant from members? Member Conforti.
I just wanted to confirm, so the views that we saw at the beginning of the report that were done by BPA, they are consistent with the heights that are proposed right now in the design, so nothing has changed from there? And the other thing, the CHIS had mentioned a recommendation of possibly keeping the party wall between 35 and 37 William Street. And we haven't talked about that today, so I don't know if, Sally, that was something that came up in your discussions with the architect, or if that's something that's being considered. Or
There are a number of party walls that stone that run perpendicular to William Street, but because the interiors are not designated in heritage conservation districts, I didn't bring that up, but they are being retained. There will be stone walls, the remnant stone walls I'm trying to think whether we have a picture. Yeah, some of them, yeah, so they will be incorporated into the new buildings.
okay, and that was a result of the recommendation from the heritage consultant, or is that just part of the?
Well, they were always going to be. The hope was, because of course when you take apart a fire damaged building, you don't know how much you can use, but the hope always was that these interesting walls would be retained, and that has proved to be possible.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions for the applicant? I see a hand up from in the audience. You were signed up to speak. Do you want to come up to the microphone briefly? I just want to comment on the zoning. We'll let you take the microphone first, because people may be listening in online.
I just wanted to address the comment about the zoning height and the rationale. Holzman Consulting did a planning rationale, and they determined that the zoning for the height of the fish market building was, part of it is 13.2 and the other part is 13.5, and the adjacent parking lot at the CTV building is also 13.5. And as owners and consulting with the heritage people, we deemed that 13.5 was a reasonable ask because of the adjacent properties on the east of our property.
Okay, and just for the record, you're Dominic Santaguida.
Dominic Santaguida, yes.
Victoria.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I do want to go to yeas and nays on Member Halsall's motion, but are there any other questions, comments for staff or the delegates? Member Halsall?
I have some questions for staff.
Okay,
Prior to
so
the
let's, questions for staff. Thank you.
Thank you for all of your work on this file. I really do like a lot of the things that have been incorporated. We're using the stone on that side entrance, the excellent design on the storefronts. You can tell that there's a lot of hard work that's gone on behind the scenes for this, and it really has made the project better. So that's greatly appreciated. For staff, if you go to slide 3 in this presentation, it shows, there we go. It shows sort of the building heights on this stretch of William Street. When I first saw the report, I was a little bit struck by the height that was proposed because it did seem quite a bit higher than any on this component of the Market Square. So I wanted to know if there have been any other infill developments on the Market Square similar to this one? Or is this the first?
There, William Street on this side of the market, there have not been any other infill developments because there haven't been any other fires, I guess. Anyway, no, there haven't. The answer is no. There is no infill at the rear of properties on William Street.
Okay. Another question on that one. I wanted to know, you've elaborated a little on the rationalization behind the current height. When I look at the heights in this area and I look at the guidelines for the Heritage Conservation District, one thing that comes in mind or comes up in both the commercial and residential areas and is identified in the report is that infill is to respect the scale and character of existing heritage properties and streetscapes, particularly those in the immediate vicinity, its neighbors. And here, when you look at the view from the street, the pedestrian view, you can see that there is quite a uniform flat roof line there. So if you could just reiterate how the 4-story design mitigates this. What we look for when, and what we agreed to when analyzing a 4-story addition at the rear was, that is why we undertook the view studies to show, to determine, you know, whether or not, because as again, the setback was determined, and you can see in these photos, the fish market, or not these photos, these views, the additional height of the fish market building, and so that was a line that we pegged the third and fourth story to, again, and the size. So the size of the setback from William Street was determined to be appropriate because of how the range that you could actually see the third and fourth story was quite small and sufficiently set back that the character as described in the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District guidelines was retained. Again, the existence of additional height does not always constitute adverse impact. And certainly this was a massing model, so these are not the colors that the architect ended up with, and those colors are lighter in character, so it has a smaller impact on that fourth story. And again, to the rear, as we've established, the rear of the building, there is a lot more height and less historic building fabric. So then the fact that it rises to 4 facing that parking lot was not deemed to be inappropriate. Okay. Speaking again to sort of the impacts of heights from a different tack, have you done any analysis on the shading that would result from this higher density? I know in our past plans, having sun in the Market Square has been a priority.
There was no sun shadow analysis undertaken. It would be very small because our experience in very large buildings says to us that this would not have a huge sun shadow effect. It was shadow, and the main place it would be shading would be the parking lot and the fish market, the rear.
When you compare with the fish market, are you comparing just to the height of the 4th story or encompassing the elevator and stairway as well?
Well, you can look in the view to the massing model there. That's what we're comparing to.
Okay, so the 4th floor.
Mm-hmm.
So when we encompass the the elevator shaft and the massing up top to accommodate the stairwell were actually higher than the height of the fish market.
Yes, but because of their cladding and their setback, that we determined that, again, that the impact there would not be an adverse impact.
Was there ever any discussion of compromise on the building height, or were?
Well, the Mr. Santiago did ask if he could have 6, and we said no, so that was a compromise. And then again, initially when we saw it, before these view analysis were undertaken, the 3rd and 4th story were closer to the front facade, and that's when if you looking at the we were looking at an aerial photo, and this was with Mr. Podolsky, who again was very helpful in this early analysis. Sorry, I keep going the wrong way, which is very irritating for everybody. So we were looking at an aerial photo, which, you know, you could clearly distinguish these lines and the various pieces of the fish market building, and I was very uncomfortable, and I said to Mr. Podolsky, why don't you just pull the front facade back to meet that building line at the fish market, because then it makes sense. There's something that it's tied to, rather than just being some random setback, and he agreed that that was a very good idea, and so since that time, the building, the 3rd and 4th story have risen from that point.
Okay, one final question for you. When we go to the rendering on, so I'm trying to help you out here and find the slide. When we go to the rendering showing, trying to find the one, I guess it's in the report, showing the final product. So you have the lighter cladding on the 4th and 3rd stories. There we go, actually, front page of the report. It seems as though in
Which slide?
I'm in the report now.
Okay.
It's page 29 of the report.
Yes.
Same one on the front of the CHIS. When we look at that rendering, it seems as though the 4th story is essentially the only visible part of this project. In your opinion then, or perhaps in the architect's opinion, would the removal of that 4th story effectively mitigate all of the visual concerns?
You mean if you took away the 4th story, then you would no longer be able to see it?
Yeah, that's what
if you
this
took it away,
rendering
you
seems
couldn't
to
see-
show.
Yeah, if you took away the 4th story, the building would be 3 stories tall, and you would not be able to see the 4th story, for example, in this view.
Yeah, and you wouldn't, at least in this. Yep. Well, I guess if.
This is the picture she's referring to.
Sorry, I think if you actually took the first half of that 4th story away, you would not see it in that view. I mean, if you take the 4th story, right, and you take the front half off, you wouldn't see it in those views.
Okay, but you would
So it's
still.
not the entire 4th floor, part of the 4th floor.
You would likely still see it in the head-on view, though, correct? To some degree.
I think there's a view from,
There is no actual place where you can stand and
can't
see
stand.
it head-on.
I think Barry had a view down in front of the market building.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of slide 9. So if you drop the 4th story back, half the story, if you remove the front half, you're saying you wouldn't be able to see essentially this project at all?
You would see the, correct, yeah, it would kind of, yeah. We'd have to do an analysis, but I think it'd be much diminished from that view. The top line would probably come down to close to where the lower balcony is.
Okay. All right, those are all the questions from me. Thank you very much, and again, thank you for your hard work on this project. It really does show the collaboration between the city and the proponent.
Okay. Thank you, Member Halsall, and thank you, Member Halsall, for the scrutiny and the questions, because I think it's important to understand how the final design was reached and some of the back and forth between the applicant and Heritage staff. I'm going to call yeas and nays. I'm personally going to vote against Member Halsall's motion. I think there's been care taken by the applicant with the setbacks and just to ensure compatibility with both the heritage aspects of the conservation district, as well as compatibility with some of the more recent buildings as well. And I think in this case, we have a building design that complements rather than conflicts with the neighborhood and the community. So we'll call yeas and nays on Member Halsall's motion.
Member Halsall?
I will vote yay, although I do have a procedural question for after on whether we've now identified that there's an opportunity to maybe not carve off the whole top story.
Member Podolsky? Councillor Shirelli? Councillor McKenney?
No.
Member Conforti?
No.
Councillor Brockington?
No.
Councillor Moffat?
No.
Vice Chair Quinn?
Yes.
Chair Gower?
No. Member Halsall, you have a procedural question, quickly.
Yes, we, in our discussion right there, since identified that we don't necessarily have to consider the removal of the full fourth story. If we were to propose setting back that upper story so that the visual impact would be effectively mitigated without having to remove all of that housing space, is there an option to introduce that as a recommendation, or?
I think there's certainly an option. I suspect that the applicant would not be open to that. I suspect we would end up with a very similar vote to what we just had in terms of a amending motion.
All right.
So the motion was defeated 5-2, 5 against, 2 in favor. So that brings us to the report recommendations in front of us. Are the report recommendations carried? Carried. Carried. Thank you. Okay, we have, and this report goes to Planning Committee on February 27th before it goes to Council. We have no in-camera items today. Are there any notices of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting? None. Are there any inquiries? None. Any other business? None today. And on adjournment, is the motion carried? Carried. Carried. We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Our next meeting is Tuesday, March 10th. Have a great week.